Mic check, mic check. Well, still technically, good morning, everybody. There we go. Avoid the feedback. Happy Wednesday. Happy Manship School Sports Summit Day. We're really excited about the continuation of this great event, and when we brought it back last year, the goal was to engage with great working professionals, media members, LSU alumni representing the Manship School, but also to explore current trends and topics, the latest in sports media, and of course, the forefront of college athletics. And these days, NIL, name, image, and likeness, is the hot topic conversation. So we set out to have the goal of bringing in some of the best and brightest from different perspectives to really have a candid and really compelling conversation about all things NIL. We're going to go in a bunch of different directions. I'll introduce our great panelists here in just a second, but then we also want to make it interactive. So start thinking about some of the pressing questions that you would like to ask our esteemed panelists and this great group that we have here today. If anyone doesn't know me, I'm Professor Chad Sabady here at the LSU Manship School, a professional in residence. I'm a proud LSU Manship alum. Graduated just a few years back in the Nick Saban era, and it was some good times here on the LSU campus, but appreciated what Dean Jack Hamilton at the time had built the foundation that continued. Really excited about Dean Kim Bissell and our current faculty and staff, and shout out to Dean Bissell who's in the room with us here today. We appreciate it. Part of all of this is part of her vision as well. And as we look to expand our growing sports comm program here at LSU Manship, we want to continue to offer great events like this, networking opportunities for our fantastic and hardworking LSU Manship School students. So just want to say special thanks to Dr. Megan Sanders, Professor, and Dr. Joshua Jackson as well for their help, very instrumental in putting together this year's Sports Summit. All right, without further ado, we've got an all-star lineup here today, y'all. To my left, to your right, let's hear a round of applause for Mr. David Fleshman, partner at Breazeale, Sachse, and Wilson, also a former student athlete here at LSU, still teaching at the LSU Law School and focusing on sports contract law, and really going to bring an insightful perspective to this conversation. David, we appreciate you. Taylor Jacobs is with us. When I think of NIL, NILSU, I think of Taylor. She's been at the forefront of everything here at LSU in the great athletic department. Currently the LSU Associate AD of NIL and Strategic Initiatives. Taylor, we appreciate you, and happy soon-to-be birthday to your little one. About to turn 1. That is exciting. Dr. Tommy Karam. Y'all know the living legend, Dr. Karam, has been working with LSU student athletes for many years in branding, distinguished instructor, the Department of Marketing and Flores MBA program. Dr. Karam, I think, speaks at more events than anybody we know, but we really appreciate his time and his expertise. One of our Manship alums here twice, Olivia Nuss. Olivia, welcome back. Currently the head of business and legal affairs at Student Athlete NIL, and specializing in some of the legal requirements and ramifications and these contracts, which are amazing and a lot of work. And you may know the name, you may know the face. He's a good guy, and he does a great job, and he's a pretty good basketball player. Mr. Trace Young for the LSU men's basketball program, at the forefront of this modern day evolution of NIL, and of course a great content creator. And Trace, it's been really fascinating to learn more about your backstory, and just want to give you a quick shout out. And how do you love Baton Rouge so far? How much has it grown on you?
It's definitely grown on me a lot. I love it. It's a place like no other, for sure. I transferred here from Colorado State, and it's been awesome. The culture here and the fan base and the sports and just everything about it, it's been amazing. The food, it's great also.
And the recent weather too, y'all. It feels pretty good outside. Look, we enjoyed the cool front, and we'll look forward to more of the same. But let's get the conversation started. All right, these past few years, so much has changed. Just overall perception of the roles and responsibilities of student athletes, the opportunities, the challenges associated with all things NIL. Let's start with some of the biggest positives. Open-ended question. Maybe Taylor, if you want to walk us through the progression of NILSU here on this campus, on this great institution, and some of the positive opportunities that have presented themselves to our hardworking student athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the NIL law changed July 1 of 2021, so we started having conversations on our campus well before that, I would say in the beginning of 2020, and we were, as an administration, trying to figure out truly how to navigate the space, and what we landed on was we really needed to focus on, first and foremost, education of our student athletes, because there was going to be a lot thrown at them quite literally overnight. And so we really worked to develop this educational platform, which eventually evolved into NILSU. And fun fact, Olivia actually was my very first student, and it was her and I in the beginning when she was an intern in our compliance office when I was on the compliance staff. And she helped, create this vision that I had of NILSU and what it was going to look like. So we really worked to form the educational base, the educational platform, making sure our student athletes knew where to go, had resources, and it has very quickly evolved into almost a mini marketing agency of sorts, where we're now educating, providing resources, giving advice on contracts, not legally negotiating. David, I know you're going to come at me about the state law. Educationally providing guidance. We are helping them create their content. We're quite literally reaching out to brands and pitching brand deals for them, connecting them with brands to make this a great part of their student athlete experience. So prior to NIL, the student athlete experience was really made up of facilities and your coaching staff and your mental health and strength and conditioning and all of these resources. And now NIL is one of those components for the student athlete experience. So I go and I meet with recruits and tell them, here's how we're going to support you, and here's what we're going to help you do in this space so that you can come to LSU and feel like you are going to, have the support and thrive in the NIL space.
Very good. Thank you for all that great context. Olivia, referencing that relationship, and did you see this unfolding? Obviously, so much has changed from those initial conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And Taylor gave me my very first opportunity in NIL, so I'm eternally grateful to her for allowing me to study. And actually, I was still at the Manship school getting my master's and my JD. It was a dual component, and so I was actually fortunate enough to be able to do my entire thesis on the evolution of NIL and the NIL space as it was happening. And so, for my role now, I work with schools all over the country who maybe don't have the resources of a bigger university like LSU. We work with the Syracuses, the Creightons of the world, the GCUs, and we put that infrastructure in place for not only education, but that mini marketing department. We're working on developing each student athlete's brand as they get contracts with us. And so I'm now more on a national scale dealing with these issues and kind of trying to predict where the industry is going so that my company, as an agency of record for these universities, can really be successful in how we implement that university to university.
Dr. Karam, you've spent significant time here on this campus making quite an impact and leaving a living legacy, and we appreciate you and your time here today. How much do you think our student athletes now can benefit from this development in NIL, but at the same time, navigating the challenges with it? Big picture, from the evolution, from the onset to the evolution into today's times, how much have our athletes benefited now?
I think they benefited wonderfully from this opportunity. I think before NIL came along, the athletes were poised for something like this. I think they've always carried themselves well. I'm into personal branding, so I talk about personal branding a lot, so forgive me, but what their personal brand is and how people see them, and I think that's the great legacy of LSU athletics. These athletes have carried themselves very well over the years, and now that the door for NIL has opened up, they can now slide in that door, and they can now leverage their good brands for the benefits of them, whatever they may want to do, and also for the companies who want to align themselves with the athletes. So I think it's a great opportunity for the athletes. I wish the other ones had a chance, but the other ones left, even though they didn't have an NIL chance. I think they've left LSU with a brand that's enhanced their careers and has enhanced LSU in general.
The LSU brand is global, and athletics many times is the front porch of our university, and that carries throughout the world. And what's great to see, and we've all seen it, our standout LSU athletes, they come back. Not only do they come back, but they reinvest in this community, in the greater Baton Rouge community as well. Trace, we'll transition to you. Just for you, transferring here from Colorado State to now embracing LSU, the university, the opportunities, and really the city, what's that experience been like? I know you kind of hinted at it, but walk us through the last year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, it was was honestly a great transition. I'm from Austin, Texas, so I love the South, and the Southern hospitality is something that I was definitely kind of longing for when I was up in Colorado. I'd say like yes ma'am, yes sir to people, and they would take it a really weird way up there. So it's definitely nice to be around good, welcoming people, and especially like being an athlete here has been the best experience ever. So yeah, it's been amazing.
And we're looking forward to a fantastic season with y'all, with the men's basketball program, as well as all of our great teams here at LSU. David, you've been on the legal side of it as well. As much positivity as there is, there's a lot of work and a lot of compromise and a lot of contradictions at times. What are the biggest challenges in your mind with the current state of name, image, and likeness?
Yeah, and first of all, I want to thank you for having me on this panel. I look at this panel, and this is an incredible group of professionals that are really doing it at the highest level. And so I'm honored to be a part of this. I would say from a legal standpoint, one of the most difficult, one of the most challenging aspects has been the uncertainty. This is a creature of state legislatures that were drafting similar bills that would allow for student athletes to profit on their name, image, and likeness, but each bill was a little different. All of the bills had a prohibition against schools really being involved in the early stages. And so that was very difficult for schools to navigate. It was difficult for athletes to navigate because the athletes would go to the school, to their coaches or their administrators, and ask for guidance, and the school kind of had to put their hands up because they couldn't offer them legal services. They couldn't negotiate a contract on their behalf. They didn't want to approve or disapprove. So, and throughout, keeping up with the ever-changing nature of this from state to state, on a national level, there's been no less than a dozen efforts at the federal level to try to bring some certainty from the legal standpoint, all of which have failed. But from a large scale, I think those are the biggest challenges. Individually, there is so much positivity that comes out of deals, and a lot of what you read about is the 2%, the superstars who are making the most amount of money,
Sure.
or the most negative aspects, or kind of side effects of NIL that sometimes dominate the narrative, which is really unfortunate because there's so much positivity that happens through NIL. But obviously, from a legal standpoint, is making sure that student athletes understand what they're agreeing to contractually, making sure that that they understand how much they're going to be paid to do what are the expectations, what are the circumstances when they would be allowed out of the contract. Are they going to have to arbitrate in Delaware in the middle of their season if there's a dispute that comes up? Those are things that attorneys can certainly help with. But the uncertainty and the challenges, don't come close to exceeding the benefits and the positivity that's come about, I would say, from these changes.
You do mention the lack of a federal legislation or federal guideline and regulation. Do you envision that changing in the near future, or do you think it's going to take time to develop that?
I don't see that happening. I don't have a lot of faith that will happen at the federal level. I think now with some of the settlement that's happening now in the House litigation, I think that there's a renewed sense and effort to try to do that. But I do not have a lot of confidence that will be done at a federal level. And at the same time, there's this renewed effort on the federal level. States are still individually running to their legislatures to make individual changes from state to state. So there's a need for uniformity, but I don't see it happening through Congress.
Just to elaborate, I do think if you have been following the House versus NCAA case, I do think that the decision in that is going to set the next precedent, because I think that is going to ring more alarms nationally at the federal level, at where we're all going to be saying, whoa, 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 we're in a much more complicated position now.
David, you mentioned the 2%. We see that, right? We see the big endorsement deals for a lot of these great student athletes, but NIL impacts all of our student athletes and the different opportunities. Open question to the group. What are some of the misconceptions, right, that the average consumer thinks about NIL or assumes about what our student athletes are granted?
Yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
No, you can go ahead.
I would say that
I have too many.
that our athletes are making life-changing money. that they suddenly don't care about their sport or their academics, and that they can now not go to class because they've made $200,000. The vast majority aren't making $200,000. And NIL is hard work. It is hard work to manage your brand. It is hard work to take the time. Just because you can catch a football or shoot a basketball or do a backflip in gymnastics doesn't mean that you're a good marketer. It takes intentional effort. And so there's a big assumption, I think, that all of the athletes across the board are now making so much money, when in reality, I think that the deals are a lot smaller and a couple $100 per athlete.
And I think along with that assumption, I don't know if anyone watched the Money Game that recently came out, but we had a lot of positive feedback. And then I also had a lot of people reach out and tell me how I'm single-handedly ruining college athletics, which was hilarious. But when you really break it down, for example, I have a student athlete who's engaged and she's in her 5th year of her sport. So she will be done after this year. And she's using NIL to cover costs for her wedding that she otherwise could not afford. And it's those kind of stories. That is 87% of our student athlete population. It's those things. They're getting rent covered. They're getting food covered. They're covering their wedding. They're doing things that are just helping them cover costs that we otherwise aren't, even though as an athletic department, we do pay for a lot for those who are on full scholarship, and we're fortunate enough to be able to provide those resources. NIL, and specifically what we've been doing here at NILSU, is teaching them that it's not just about the one deal now. It's about leveraging it for deal number 2, deal number 3, but then also the job after you graduate. And that is the misconception. I think a lot of schools are maybe starting to see that more because I feel like it has been a narrative that we've put out there a lot, but it's building a brand and leveraging that brand, just like Dr. Karam would always teach them, well beyond your sport. Because as a former student athlete, you finish your eligibility and you have to figure out what you're going to do next. I did not turn pro. Majority of us don't turn pro. So how can we utilize these opportunities with them where they otherwise may not have the time to go out and get an internship or a job, and teach them how to capitalize on these moments as if they are getting those working opportunities?
And Dr. Karam, can you expand on what they've referenced in terms of building that brand and the work that it takes, that really these deals aren't just handed to the majority of our athletes?
Right, and I may be wrong here, so if so, let me know. I don't think every kid has an NIL deal. So it's not like, I think another misconception is that every student athlete has an NIL deal. And I don't think they do. But it doesn't mean they can't understand what their personal brand is and use LSU and this wonderful school and the sports they're in and the high visibility of the sports for other people to see them and for them to promote themselves with or without an NIL deal. And I think that's, to me, one of the great parts of LSU and really any university is for the athletes to understand that the platform they're on, the athletic platform they're on, provides them with a chance to be seen on very many levels. And if they are seen in, as we call it, a very likable, marketable way, maybe there's not an NIL deal, but there may be a company out there who wants them for something one day. So then when they do leave, then the doors open, or at least there are doors that might open because of what they've done during their time as an athlete.
Trace, as a student athlete, what have you experienced? I mean, what have you learned about this process? And in terms of, you've always been good at creating content and having that marketability, but now putting a capitalization on it.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I've always loved making content. It's always been something that I really enjoyed. But, I mean, I've learned more through my NIL experience than any marketing class could teach me. And I'd love, and that's no shot on LSU education, I've learned a lot in my classes, but I mean, just like being in there firsthand, like really working and making all these connections, relationships, and just seeing the day. Like I just flew in from Dallas last night from a photo shoot, and like talking to all the photographers and all the different just things that go into all these brand deals, and it's been amazing. So I loved it. I'm in favor.
And he's in that top 2%.
I'd like to also expand on what David was saying. I think, one of the biggest misconceptions here is that NIL is a new thing, right? Everyone thinks, oh, this just started in 2020, 2021 when we saw the litigation. Like, no. If you're on a college campus as a college, not even a college athlete, but just a college student, you can go out and market yourself and capitalize on your personal name, image, and likeness, right? Before 2021, as an athlete, Trace wouldn't have been able to go and do that. He would have signed away all his rights to monetize his personal name, image, and likeness simply because he was playing in his sport, right? So you're generally talking about influencer advertising here and allowing this group, the athletes, to participate in influencer marketing the same way that any other college student can.
Let's talk about the win-win situation, right? Because there is a lot of positivity and opportunity associated with NIL. Maybe it is the smaller sport and quote-unquote athlete who helps pay for a wedding, something like that. Taylor, what else can you share about this is different for the modern student athlete that, yes, they may not be in the 2%, but this is just helping them in their professional development and or personal lives at times?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I also want to say is we don't force our athletes to participate in NIL. Me and my staff, we meet with every team individually at the beginning of the year, and we tell them, you don't have to do this. So don't feel like just because a teammate's doing it or you're seeing it on the news that you have to be in this percentage of athletes. And we have a majority, or a lot of them, maybe not majority, but we have a large group of them who say, listen, I want to focus on school and my sport and doing what I need to do to get my degree, which is completely respectable. I respect that because, again, I talked about this in the show. NIL, you have to hustle. Trace can speak to it. He's a hustler. A lot of our student athletes, you're reaching out to brands, you're communicating with brands, you're sending pitches, you're hearing no a lot of the time. You're not just getting money handed to you. Again, a misconception. People think that they just walk down the street and people are just handing them cash now. That's not the case. Maybe for some, but not the case for all student athletes. And so I think it's finding that balance of, do I want to participate and do I want to try to capitalize on this moment, or do I really just want to be a student and be an athlete? Because that is what you are. You are a student athlete. And we still say that in every recruiting meeting, because at the end of the day, if you don't pass your classes, you're no longer eligible to compete. And if you're not competing, most of your NIL contracts say that they can cancel those agreements due to your lack of competition. So think about that as well, and your lack of exposure. You're getting the NIL opportunity because you're playing on the court that's being broadcasted on ESPN, and people are now knowing who you are.
Trying to find that balance, right, between being a student, the academia of it all, being an athlete, the athletics, which is a full-time job. We really know that with most of our student athletes, and these exciting new opportunities. Trace, how do you balance that schedule, the demands of, to your point, having to hustle and almost taking on another full-time job?
Yeah, I mean, even just using this past week, for example, I mean, I already said, like, we had a scrimmage in Atlanta, flew straight from Atlanta to Dallas, came back for practice the next morning class, and, like, I don't have time for a job. And I think, you know, if you want to be able to hustle and grow your following and make some money and provide for yourself and set yourself up for after college, like these things I'm doing now, these kind of are my internships in my job right now. So I think you should have that ability to do that. And, you know, like Taylor said, it really is a grind. And I'm, you know, composing emails and sending it out and trying to build these relationships and capitalize on it as best as I can. So, yeah, it's a lot, but.
I also want to elaborate. Trace has, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a coaching staff that is supportive as long as he shows up to practice. But at the end of the day, we do tell the coaches, you can dictate. You can say, you can't go take a personal day on a Monday and miss practice to go do an NIL deal. So you, as a coach, they are now also having to manage this from the perspective of, I need a competitive team and I need my athletes to show up to practice because my goal, and I'm getting paid as the coach, to go win a national championship. But at the same time, I've got to maintain this relationship with my student athletes where they feel like they are benefiting and they are being afforded this opportunity. So finding that balance as well. So it is sport by sport as to, you know, I probably would say that not all of our coaches are going to let their athletes leave from a scrimmage and go to a photo shoot. And, you know, that's probably not the case with every sport. And we've allowed the coaches to really dictate what those team rules are going to look like as well.
Olivia, let's get your perspective on advocating for the student athletes, right? And helping them find those deals and connecting the smaller universities in a sense, because again, while we're familiar with the big endorsement deal and the Nike, the Gatorade, there's a lot of other potential opportunities for smaller institutions to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to understand this entire dynamic, we also need to understand, going back to the misconception, that all NIL deals start with a brand interested. The environment right now is what I would like to call split into two, between this idea of organic NIL, where a brand approaches a student athlete, and synthetic NIL, which is what I call it, which is the boosters and donors of a particular university wanting to support student athletes, but not sure how they can get involved. And that's what my company is mainly facilitating, is those synthetic NIL deals that start with the money, and then our job is to go out and find the brand partnerships for those student athletes. And so I think in a successful environment, you have both, right? But those synthetic deals that are mostly football and basketball, if we're being honest, those are very different from the organic brand partnerships that you see with Olympic sports. And so I admire what Taylor does, because Taylor has to go out on an individual sport and team level and teach and coach these kids how to build their brands so that they can be matched with a brand or an opportunity. Whereas a lot of those synthetic deals that I'm doing on the back end, we have those local, regional, and national partnerships to hand to those players once the money comes in, right? And so I think, as far as advising student athletes, it's really difficult in this environment for a student athlete to protect themselves if they don't have the right type of guidance. And I can tell you, there are things that attorneys try and hide in contracts: termination clauses, penalty clauses. If you don't show up for X, you owe them the money that they gave you, right? Or maybe it's tenfold, maybe it's a penalty or a clawback provision. And so there's a lot of things that are developing in this environment, in synthetic NIL, where if you don't have the proper guidance, or if your agent just jumped onto the NIL train and maybe doesn't have the proper training to steer you in the right direction, that can be very dangerous for a student athlete. So it's really important that student athletes seek proper guidance and understand and read what they're getting themselves into before they commit to an NIL deal, however exciting it may be.
And I feel like the decisions made now obviously impact the short term, but the long term as well. Dr. Karam, in terms of long-term branding and marketability, what have you seen in recent years with this emergence of NIL opportunities that can potentially impact their not only professional athletic career, but then their long-term career?
I think it's a great opportunity for them to propel themselves long-term. If they're seeing an NIL here in a nice way, they carry themselves well. It's not about championships. If you get lucky, you get one, that's fine. But they carry themselves well. I think it propels their future. You know, they may be able to leave LSU with an NIL deal with somebody. They make it to the pros, then they're just going to swap it out with somebody, not of more importance, but the deals get bigger because it's going to be a professional team. And so I think those opportunities, I haven't really seen them yet. I'm not saying they're there, but I think that's coming. In a couple more years, you'll see where they were at LSU and where they've progressed professionally. But I think if their brand is good in college, it's going to be even more better, and that's good English. It's going to be more better in the pros. But not everybody's going to have a life in the pros, and therefore I keep going back to my little angle about the person, how they're going to be seen, and if the fans fall in love with them athletically, and if the public just adores them. I just think their brand is going to be so much more marketable. And I don't know what the dollar amount is, but I know that the longevity of it is going to be very beneficial to them.
I will.
These will seek them out in a sense. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to elaborate too. I think for the 2% that have made a ton of money, they've been able to almost get a taste of that type of platform before they move to the professional level, which has been helpful. But I also, for example, in the sport of beach volleyball, when those individual athletes turn professional, they have to seek out brand partnerships to help sponsor them in order to compete in their professional tournaments. And so we are trying to teach them, use these current NIL deals and again, leverage them so that you have that support when you're attempting to turn pro. Now, don't sign a contract now while you're an athlete that says you're going to get paid when you turn pro, but continue to build that relationship so that when you finish your eligibility, you can go back to this partner that you've been working with for the past 2, 3, 4 years and say, hey, I'm transitioning into that next phase of my career. Would you like to continue sponsoring me? And we've actually seen a lot of success with that specifically. I had another point, but now I just forgot it. It'll come back to me.
One conversation I also wanted to include was the dynamic of the changing college athletic landscape. And transfers have happened for many years, many decades. The conversation seems to be a joint one these days with the emergence of NIL, the transfer portal, college athletes relocating every other year based on the assumption or perception of endorsement deals. What have y'all seen? What may be the reality? What are the misconceptions of NIL is specifically tied to why these student athletes are transferring all across the country?
I would say that's just the easy assumption. And again, I think Olivia mentioned NIL is not new. I mean, think about old Gatorade endorsements, Wheaties boxes, and everything. Those are NIL deals. What's new is the application to college athletics. But if you go back and you look at some of the first, critiques of the first football game, there's always been accusations that the other teams had bought their players. This is not a new narrative that we're hearing.
It's just legal now.
There's a mechanism to do that, but you also we see playing out is that doesn't guarantee success either. And so if you come for money, you may leave for money. And so there's an evolving kind of idea of why are players coming to this school. If it's just for money, that they may leave just for money. But if it's to get to the next level and they believe that LSU or Alabama is the place to do that, then they might stick it out even if they have a $50,000 higher offer to go play at a different school.
And I think another misconception is that a lot of people say that the transfer portal happened because of NIL or vice versa, and that's really not the case. I spent my time in compliance prior to transitioning into NIL, and they were actually conversations that were coexisting, and they just happened to be implemented around the same time, but the transfer portal didn't come about because of NIL. And the NCAA didn't say, oh, well, we're going to throw in the transfer portal now and go figure it out. No, the transfer portal was a conversation to also better the student athlete experience and to protect the student athlete in the sense of we institutions, the NCAA, didn't want them locked into a particular institution if they were, mentally, we want to protect their mental health, right? And if I needed to be able to transfer home, I should have had that right. That happened, and NIL happened. They didn't happen because of each other, and it didn't help the timing, I guess, because NIL is now probably used against people in the transfer portal, to your point, but they weren't because of one another, which is a misconception I think I get a lot.
Yeah. And I would also say, Olivia described NIL as synthetic and organic. Another way that I've, real or fake or bag money NIL, which is we are going to pay a player to come here under the, guise of NIL versus true NIL deals. What Trace is doing, and we're not asking about any bag money NIL or anything like that, Trace, but Trace has built a following through intentional, dedicated work to build a brand, to put out high quality content, which takes a lot of work. That is NIL. That is the true and organic NIL, where you hear a lot of the negativity, and the narrative is, schools putting money into a pot through a collective to go pay these student athletes a lot of money just to come to this school or to transfer. That's what I think of more in terms of bagman NIL, which again is not a new concept. There's been schools, dating back to the NCAA's formation who have been, slapped by the NCAA for paying student athletes in cars or in suitcases full of money all under the table. That's more on the pay for play side, which we're getting there, and that's a whole nother topic for maybe a whole nother panel at some point. But I think making that distinction in your mind between the pay for play, pooling money to pay people to come to school and to compete for this university under the guise of NIL is a whole separate animal than I would say a true NIL deal where a business sees an opportunity to promote its product or to align itself with an athlete, and the athlete also sees that company or business as a genuine opportunity to align with a business that makes sense.
I also think because of everything that's happened with collectives, that we are so much further along now in this new conversation of paying student athletes. So if you truly take the time and go dive into the House versus NCAA case and see where we're going to be, if you had asked me on July 1st of 2021 if we would be here this soon, I would have said no. But I can remember the day that I was called into our AD's office when one of these said collectives was formed at another school in our conference. And in that moment, I said, here we go. This is it. This is what's going to ruin it, because now we're just paying people. And here we are, less than 2.5 years later from when that happened, to we are in the weeds talking about what is a revenue share conversation going to look like.
But there's two separate conversations. NIL involves third-party money. These are businesses and brands. These are not the universities. Mm-hmm. Money's not flowing through the university and then paid to Trace to promote a third party. Okay, so before July 1st, 2021, student athletes couldn't do either. They couldn't. It could be a completely unrelated third party that wants Trace to sign a bunch of autographs, in Alaska, has nothing to do with LSU, and that would have rendered him ineligible to compete. That's absurd. He's an amateur. How could you possibly expect to play college sports and receive, a free ham sandwich at a golf club somewhere, buy a booster somewhere of a school that you don't go to? That's insane. You can't expect to play sports. So that's a whole different conversation that now we're moving into. The money that is the revenue share involves funds that are within LSU's accounts. The revenue share of multi-million dollar broadcasting contracts. That is where we are moving, and it's moved very fast, and we're getting there. NIL will always be here to stay now. As of July 1st, 2021, NIL is not getting any less important. And I would say, really, NIL is just your personal brand. It's been important for athletes. LSU athletes have done that very well for a long time. They're going to continue to do that because it's not just about the NIL deal or this one contract. It's about the future opportunity, and it's forcing student athletes now to think beyond their playing days here, which is fantastic. They're asking themselves the question, and a lot through the training, the education, what do you care about? What are you interested? Do you love dogs? PetSmart may be interested in doing a deal. Have you thought about that? I mean, you've got 6 of them at your apartment. You seem to love dogs. What do you want to do for a living after this? If you're a photographer, Trace makes some very high quality content. He may decide to start his own media company after this because he's been able to actually put time and invest very similar to how other students do with going to class or doing research projects, internships. Trace doesn't have the opportunity to do internships.
Well, as these years progress, we know it's not going anywhere, right? That the opportunities will continue because the spotlight on college athletics is bigger than ever before, right? More access, bigger broadcasting rights, more revenue to share with our student athletes. Trace, just to get your student athlete perspective again, entering this realm, it is the unknown initially. We talked about balancing the work and the academics and the athletics, but what advice would you have to maybe some other student athletes in the room for those navigating these waters for the first time in terms of what they can expect, but also that kind of responsibility when we're thinking about the long term and the long-term benefits for your career?
I would, advice I would give, I would probably just say, first of all, it's not for everybody. Like Taylor always says, if you don't enjoy making content and you don't enjoy being in front of the camera and all that, then you don't have to. And some people try to, force it and whatever. But if it's something that you love, then do it and give it your all, just like you would do in anything. But I think no matter what it is, like if a good thing is created, like certain people would try to abuse it, like no matter what it is. But I don't think that makes it any less of a good thing. If a recruit is just transferring 5 different times in 5 years for more money, like, a school can realize that and not recruit them. Or, if they have the funds and they think that they can help them succeed that year, then maybe it's a good investment for them if it's going to help the team, So, I don't know. I would just say, be consistent and really just do what you love at the end of the day.
And when you think about doing what you love, post-playing career, what do you want to do one day? That's an interesting insight.
That's a great question. I don't know exactly where God's going to take me, but, I do love, making content. I'll always do that, whether it's on the side, it's making pretty good money right now. So I'll definitely keep that up after college. But, I love the business side of things. That's the other part. Is like, I know I'm not going to play professionally after this year, and I don't want to coach. I'm kind of trying to leave the gym after this. So all these connections, all the relationships on the business side of sports, like I love sports, and like being able to meet all these amazing people and continue that, I think would be awesome on the business side of it. So
speaking of those relationships, Dr. Karam and Olivia, y'all can both weigh in, please. How crucial, how critical are these times for our student athletes to not only help build their brand, but also these connections professionally moving forward?
I think it's always been critical.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's been so dynamic even before NIL was born. People meet the athletes, they're impressed with the athletes. The athlete's not prepared for that particular area of work, but yet the athlete is so marketable that they can find a position for them. So when he leaves, it's not basketball related, hopefully he's created a relationship with people down the line, I have no clue where they may be, who have seen him away from the camera, because not everything's content. Today's not content, it's live. And we try to help them understand that away from the camera, they're one day going to see you, shake your hand, have coffee with you, and see who it is they're going to hire. And if what he's done, which I think it is, very impressive, and he's been able to impact them in a very positive way, then when he calls back to them after his college days are over, they're more likely to consider him. And I think that's the beauty of personal branding before NIL, and I think that's the power of NIL for the athletes whenever they leave LSU. It's the opportunity to be seen in this environment, but yet these companies, many of y'all are business people, you know what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody, yeah, their core skill is there, but you're looking beyond that. And these athletes have this great chance to be able to be seen and hopefully in a likable, marketable way. If I may add one little thing about NIL, if I may. I love NIL. I'm pro NIL. I think it's fantastic. Everything about it is wonderful. But I think the name NIL gets lumped in everything. Everything bad. And it's NIL is NIL, and NIL is good. But now, everything bad, the bad weather was because everything NIL related. NIL, like,
Taylor is single-handedly ruining college athletics.
It's ruining everything. It's ruining the environment, and it's ruining, my golf game.
The traffic.
And it's really not. I mean, to me, NIL is what it is. It's great. It's long overdue. It's very valuable for athletes. It's just valuable. And I think it's not perfect, but it's valuable. But it kind of gets linked to everything, and I think that's not fair to the whole purpose of what NIL was intended to do.
Well, and the funny thing with it is, specifically here, I feel like the Baton Rouge community at this point knows that we do take a strong educational approach here. Maybe the country doesn't realize that, but we do. But institutions have been doing this for their student athletes for a long time, trying to teach them the value of networking. As my alma mater did it for me, and I knew as a student athlete, I needed to figure my life out. And I was fortunate enough to intern in my athletic department when I was going through my experience. But now I think the narrative is so, to your point, so heavily focused on, NIL, and it's so bad. Whenever people hear what we're doing at NILSU, they're like, oh my gosh, this is life-changing. I'm like, but we've really been doing it. It's just I'm trying to be creative now, and quite honestly, I bribe the athletes and tell them, I'm going to try to get you an NIL deal if you come learn how to be a better person. I'm just being honest.
I'd also like to give the national perspective, because I think what Taylor's saying is so important, and I think all of this is really based in the law, right? It comes down to antitrust law, which is supposed to prevent anti-competitive practices, right? So when we were talking about the transfer portal, the reason those restrictions were loosened was because the NCAA got sued, because how are you going to tell a student athlete you can't freely transfer? It's a restraint of trade, right? And so I just wanted to bring up something that Trey said is if you are transferring 5 different times to 5 different universities, that coach is probably going to recognize that you're not there for the right reasons. And that program's probably not going to want you. They want people who want to develop themselves wholly at a university, not just say, oh, you're going to give me 500 as opposed to 5,000, well, then I'm out. That's generally, I would say, the attitude of agents and coaches is that there is an understanding that while the NIL money is attainable, there's a lot more that goes into a person being developed from 18 to 22 years old, right? That's the most formative years of your life is in college. And so if you're not taking into consideration as a student athlete all of those elements, you're going to end up missing out on a lot more than you think you are.
And to elaborate on that, because I think this is a good point too, the real NIL versus synthetic, as Olivia says, or fake, as I say sometimes, that has almost created this misconstrued vision for our athletes. They don't even truly understand their value because the synthetic NIL has put so much money in front of them that when we bring a true marketing deal wholly based off of who your playing time and your social media following and the work that you're going to put in, the number is so drastically different that the student athlete looks at that true marketing opportunity and says, well, they're not paying me enough. And
Exactly.
I'm like, you have 1,000 followers. This is more than enough. I promise you. So that has also created that really like misconstrued vision, which has been, in my personal opinion and in my seat that I sit in, difficult to navigate, because to that holistic approach where we're trying to say, look at all these things we're teaching you and we're going out and we're finding you these NIL deals, we are, but we're bringing them to a lot of the student athletes and they're going, well, that's not enough. And I'm like, I'll take it. I tell the brand, like, I'll do it for you. Like, you send me the money and I will do the NIL deal for you, because the just misconception of what they should be making is also on their end, I guess.
And there's a wide spectrum to all of these NIL deals. Can we go inside the deal a little bit? Maybe walk us through some of the conversations that are had initially with different business entities, with the student athletes as well, and trying to find the right match for certain individuals, certain brands. What can y'all share into that insight of going inside the NIL deal, the deal-making process?
Yeah, absolutely. I can start there. So again, my company calls itself an agency of record. We run, own, or operate collective entities. And collectives have gotten a bad rap because, like Taylor said, there's this inflated idea of how much you can make. And so as an agency of record, what we are doing at all of our universities, where it differs from independently run collectives, is we are actually sourcing NIL deals on a local, regional, and national level. We have sales representatives. We have general managers for every region that we work in, and we work with over 56 universities across the country. And we also have student athlete success and client success managers at every single one of those schools. So we have people on the ground who are working with individual student athletes to identify the student athletes that get put on a contract. So I would say about 80% of the work I do is retainer contracts. A retainer means you're paid every month to be available for our company for 6 months to a year, and we go out and we source those deals for you and you show up for them. The other 20% of those deals are organic marketing deals where, again, local, regional, national brands approach us and say, hey, we want to use your student athletes. Our strength as a business is that we contract with whole teams, not just individual players. So we are less of the 1%, 2% players, and we hire whole football teams, whole basketball teams, and we have those across the country. So in their contracts, they owe us a certain amount of autograph signings, appearances, and social media posts every year. So when they are contracted with us, for example, I worked with CBS last month on a Survivor campaign. Survivor approached us and said, hey, we can't get to the Gen Zers. What do? They wanted to create a filter, basically, where it would show your fate for Survivor. How many of you guys know what Survivor is? You guys are so young in here. Okay, great. So it worked, right? So we were able to contract with all of our athletes across 56 universities. They all used the social media filter, and they all posted online. And they all got paid for that because we had sourced that deal, but they were already on retainer. So our retainer agreements allow the flexibility for us to go out and advocate for those student athletes, where again, maybe it's not the brand approaching them specifically because we don't deal with high profile athletes, but they do want the volume of athletes, or they want athletes that are affordable with a particular amount of followers, or whatever the metrics need to be. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic than sourcing from one school, because we take a national approach to NIL for those who maybe wouldn't have had the opportunities. For example, I have the entire OU softball team on retainer right now, and they're getting more opportunities than they would have if these were only locally sourced. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic from an agency perspective nationally. And I can tell you, collectives that are independently run are not doing this. They're paying these large sums of money, and there has to be a quid pro quo with NIL, right? So you can't just sit there and get paid. You have to do something for it, and they're making them do the bare minimum. And that's where that inflated ego comes from, and that inflated sense of entitlement is, oh, well, I got paid $500,000 to do 2 social posts. Why am I not getting paid the same here? And so it's very challenging from our perspective as well.
And from the campus side of things, so what we're doing, we meet with all of our athletes who choose to meet with us. We'll meet one-on-one with them, sit down, and basically identify who are you as a person and as an individual. What are your core values? What's important to you? What kind of content do you truly want to post? Because if you're a vegetarian, I'm probably not going to bring you the cheeseburger deal, right? Like, I need to better know who they are individually and what they're comfortable with and what's authentic to them. And then from there, we have, within NILSU, we're going out and basically educating businesses locally, regionally, and nationally to say, hey, here's what the benefits of NIL are, and here's what student athletes at LSU can offer you in the NIL space. So that's kind of how we handle it from the campus perspective.
Trace, would you mind sharing just some of your encounters? And is it a comfortable environment, or can it be stressful? Can it be a burden at times to kind of identify which direction you want to go, which brands you want to endorse?
At times, I think a lot of that's more just identity, kind of knowing who you are and what you want to promote. My faith is really important to me in Jesus Christ, and that's something that I make content about, and I try to showcase a lot. And so I've had to turn down a lot of brands who will, would pay me very, very well, and the money sounds good, but I just, I want to make sure that I'm promoting things that I also believe in. And so, and same goes, there's been some smaller brands who maybe the pay isn't as good, but like, hey, I really support what y'all are doing, and I really like the direction y'all are going, and I would love to be a part of it. So maybe I'll take a little pay cut. So I mean, it can be a little stressful, but I think once you really understand what you value and what you want to promote, then it kind of clears it up.
Absolutely. David, I'm thinking of some legal conflicts that presents over time. Walk us through some general examples of common points of contention among companies, student athletes, and how you can navigate that process.
Yeah, so it's really not all that different than any type of contract. There's obviously potential obstacles for every time you bring business partners together and want to do something. If you don't vet out the potential problems early on, that's when a lot of the problems really pop up. A lot of these deals that we're talking about, they don't, if a $300 deal, the parties aren't running out to go hire an attorney and pay them, $300 an hour to negotiate a contract or to draft up a 5-page contract where the risk is $300. So I think if you're not going to have a contract, I think just making sure it's in plain language and the expectations are clear. I think that's and it's difficult early on. Businesses, I would say, vastly undervalued a lot of the student athletes, value there in a deal. And I would say that athletes, by and large, vastly overvalued, what one social media post from their account with 1,000 followers, what that may do for a business like Smoothie King. Smoothie King says, not much. The athlete says, I'm going to make you the best smoothie place in Baton Rouge. There was a big disconnect. And so when both parties put, pen to paper and lay out the expectations, this is when I need you to appear, when I expect you to appear, this is for how long, this is what the deliverables are, and then this is when you're going to be paid. I think that takes care of a lot of the issues. Mostly miscommunication, I would say, and the expectations and unreasonableness of certain parties in, and trying to enforce provisions. By and large, in my experience handling NIL contracts, I think businesses have done the heavy lifting to try to make sure that the contracts are not viewed as predatory. There are certain companies out there that are trying to get the best deal and to get as many deliverables at the lowest price possible, and none of them are feasible from an athlete's standpoint, from time, schedule, being expected to do things over, make this many posts in 1 month. I mean, it doesn't even make marketing sense to do. So there's a lot. There's some national examples that we're seeing come out in the courts now, including deals that extend well beyond their term in college in exchange for a percentage of their earnings in a professional, in the NFL. That when you zoom out and look at it, it looks pretty bad for everybody involved. There's also the failing to deliver on one side of the contract. Promises, we'll pay you $13 million if you come here. Ultimately, when you don't get paid that, there's a lawsuit and it becomes very public. And so there's a lot of potential roadblocks. I would also say, though, it is worth, whether it's an email, whether it's on a scroll that's handwritten, whatever the medium, text message is better than nothing.
Put it in writing.
Put it in writing is better, certainly is better than nothing. And we're seeing now more contracts, NIL move down to the high school level, which isn't surprising to me. I would say it's less athletes that have, that type of market that would attract local businesses, but we're seeing that now with the social media and the exposure that kids are getting in freshman, sophomore year in high school. We are now seeing deals and negotiating deals to protect them, and we have to involve their parents because they're minors. Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of issues that pop up, but I would say if you want to look at the negative aspects and you want to focus on the challenges, I would say that's a wrong turn. I would flip the script and see the opportunities that there are in this. Branding has always been important. I love hearing student athlete stories. They're amazing stories. They've struggled, they've had failure, they've gotten back up, they've achieved great things. They're not scared to fail. These are things that are every day on this campus and every other campus in the country. High school athletes have the same thing. They face adversity. They rally their team beyond, to achieve incredible things that nobody expected at the beginning of the season. Those are stories that we love to hear. And NIL is just a platform to tell a lot of those stories. And there's a lot of opportunities with high school kids, in the movie setting. Patrick Mulhern has been pushing to find ways to get student athletes in front of cameras. And that is a great use. Instead of looking at the problems or the challenges, look at the opportunities and look for ways that you can also help, protect the student athletes that don't have legal representation. We're trying to do a lot at the law school to try to help our law students get some experience by creating a clinic to help them match up with athletes at Southern and LSU to provide that gap. I don't care how big the deal is or how small the deal is. It would be nice to have an attorney put their eyes on it. And so there's a lot of initiatives, and I think everyone in this room, when you think about it, raise your hand if you've watched college athletics less in the past 3 years than you did beforehand. Everyone knows somebody that thinks that NIL is ruining, or Taylor, is ruining college athletics. It just doesn't bear out. If anything, people have leaned into it more. The transfer portal is difficult to really know who's on the team, and it can be confusing. But from an NIL standpoint, I've learned about players from BYU or from Georgia Tech that I didn't know existed, but for an advertisement or someone sharing a story that suddenly I'm tearing up hearing about, about the challenges and adversity that they had. See the opportunities, focus on the opportunities, and help, wherever you can, help, one aspect of it, help somebody navigate it. I love working with everyone on this panel in one way. Taylor was our star witness in the first NIL lawsuit that was filed in the country against LSU, seeking to get access to these records. They wanted to get under the hood and see all the terms of all the deals of LSU athletes. Taylor was our star witness in the court case here in Baton Rouge, and we won. And they maintained the confidentiality of these contracts, many of which have confidentiality provisions. And so, getting to work with Olivia and to see her, be at the forefront of this. No one's drafted and been at the center of NIL contracts, more NIL contracts than Olivia. So it's really neat to see and to work with people that share the same interest in this. None of us know how it's going to be. And if anybody tells you that they're an expert and they're going to tell you exactly what it's going to look like, is not an expert. I can tell you that. There's been conversations we pick each other's brains all of the time. What do you think about this? Ever run across this issue? That's where your career becomes fun, when you are really developing that passion that you have into a collaborative scenario where you're helping better people's lives. And it's been really awesome to work with each person on this panel, including Trace. We're about to start working together a lot, I think.
Thank
He's
you
going to be an
very
attorney.
much.
I don't know if he knows this yet, but his next step
Law
is going to
school?
be an attorney. Yeah.
It has been a fantastic conversation, but we want y'all to get involved as well. So we do have time for a few audience questions. I believe we do have a microphone that we can pass around. So go ahead and raise your hand. We've got a couple over here. Marilia, thank you very much. I think the mic is right up here on the podium. Let's start right over here on my left to your right in the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Would you elaborate a little bit more on the effect that NIL has had on recruitment?
Yeah, I can take that one if you're. Oh,
Well, you give your perspective off campus, and I'll give mine on campus.
perfect. So I work again on a national front. So I deal with agent representation every single day for agents who represent athletes for NIL initiatives all over the country. And I would say, as far as recruiting goes, that is the synthetic side of NIL that we keep saying, right? And now, unfortunately, it has become, I think, a permanent part of this environment because there will always be boosters and donors who want to know how to help and want to see their team succeed. I would have to just say, again, that if NIL is your only consideration going to a school, the coach is not going to respect it, and the student athlete is ultimately going to be unhappy. And we are seeing a trend of coaches actually saying no to players during the recruitment process because they can see that all they see is the dollar sign. So I would say, while it is out of control right now, I think you're going to see this industry even out substantially, especially with the House settlement.
From the campus perspective, so at LSU, we have 17 varsity sports technically, so you can imagine there's a select few that get to really engage in that synthetic side of NIL, and then the rest of them are still having to sell the idea of NIL because it's still the student athlete experience for everybody. And so I pretty much give recruiting presentations to every sport now, either myself or someone on my staff, to sell the branding component of this is everything that we're going to do to try to help you in the space. So you can come here. I can't promise you a dollar amount because, one, it's illegal by the NCAA, but two, I can't guarantee that. I mean, I can look at someone's social media and think we can probably go secure you some really great deals, but there's no guarantee that a brand is going to commit to that one individual. So we are, as an institution, with our coaches and our coaching staffs, trying to really figure out, like, hey, again, I'll preach it till I'm blue in the face, whether they want to hear it or not. But NIL is way more than the dollar signs. You've got to look at this from a perspective of, let's build your brand. Let's think about how this is going to be long term. And here's how we are helping you do that. And here's the resources that NILSU has that can help you do that. And 9 times out of 10, most of my recruits say, wow, I've never seen this anywhere else. And they really are fascinated by that component of it. And so that's something that we don't want to lose sight of here. Now, I too have to deal with the coach side of, well, I've got to get this recruit, top kid in the world. How are you going to help them in NIL? And unfortunately, I'm not in a position to be able to say, oh, well, we'll provide you with this. But in our role on campus, we are either giving statistics of what's happened historically or connecting them with third parties like what Olivia does to say, here's how you can go hear more specifically about a dollar amount if you need that.
And
But
yeah,
just to be- go ahead.
It's often, again, we've abided by NCAA rules so far, so we don't offer NIL deals to any recruits that are not, any athletes in general that are not already on campus. So the NIL deal comes once they are on campus and enrolled. And so again, not everyone in the environment functions that way, but we try to be a good partner for our schools because ultimately it's not us that are going to be punished at the end of the day as the third party, it's the internal university and staff. So we do a lot of education with coaches around saying you cannot guarantee a dollar amount, you cannot give a definitive offer because it's not in your control and it's against NCAA regulations.
And just to be clear, though, the recruiting process pre-July 1st, 2021 was not pure. These are conversations that have been happening for decades and decades of promises of summer jobs, of new cars, of all kind of things.
Not here at LSU.
No, of course not. I meant at A&M is what I'm just talking about Texas A&M. But I think that's sometimes lost, and it feels that way. It feels like there's a lot of change, and you hear about the $13 million promise to come to this school, and you can't help but feel like it's turning the, it's really changing. That was happening well before, decades before. And so, and again, that's not a reason to continue doing that, but I think that people are hearing, when they hear that LSU will invest in helping them learn who they are and how to develop their brand that will provide them with benefits well after they finished, they hang their cleats up. I think that's what is very effective because some schools, and we see that LSU leads in this, and they have led from day one. I mean, make no mistake about it. There were other schools that said, we don't know what to do with this, how to do it. We promise to make sure that we're compliant and also make sure student athletes have opportunities. LSU, from day one, was promoting NILSU. Even that brand alone was being promoted in Times Square and showing all the recruits that we are invested in teaching you. We have a long history and a long line of some of the best marketers and the best, I would say, personal brands out there, including Shaq. Dr. Karam, have you met Shaq? Dr. Karam helped develop Shaq, so Shaq wasn't getting paid for that. But I think it's just an important thing to remind yourself. Sometimes when we feel like the sky is falling because of this, we realize this is a market that's been created by decades of a prohibition against receiving a ham sandwich. Anything of benefit for a student athlete was a violation. And honestly, I don't know if I have a problem if someone was willing to pay me a lot of money to step foot on this campus and throw a football or try to hit a softball. The market is the market, and I think that's for each school to consider. That's what we're dealing with is different perspectives on that in recruiting. But I don't think that it's created a lot of the issues. I think it's exposed maybe how serious some of the issues are.
What I will say in the recruiting piece too, and I really, a lot of people say that the coaches did this, but I feel for our coaches because they're competing with all hearsay. We don't have in writing from anyone. We have no legitimate proof anywhere what a school or what a collective or what a business has really put into a program. And so when all of our coaches are saying, well, this school's doing this and this school's doing this and this, that's their livelihood too. We as administrators expect them to win championships. I mean, they meet with their sport administrator and our athletic director all the time and have expectations to meet. Your students need to go to class. You've got to win a championship. You've got to get here. And so they're stressed, and I don't blame them. Like, there are times where I want to punch them in the face sometimes. I love them, but I feel the pressure that they're under, and that has changed. The way they're having to recruit has changed because they're having to deal with narratives that may or may not be true, but they can't ignore it because it's coming from schools in our conference that they're competing with.
One of our students had a question. Yes, sir. Microphone's coming right to you. Please go ahead.
In the documentary, we saw Trace and Aaliyah kind of work together, and I think Trace was helping Aaliyah with that navigate NIL. How common is that, and what's the benefit of having big name athletes work with maybe your lesser known athletes so they can get more deals and market themselves better?
Trace, do you want to share just a little bit of your experience with that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, all the athletes here, I feel like most of us are pretty close and pretty tight-knit community. So, like, we all eat together at the dining halls and stuff like that. So, I mean, if you have a friend that, you know, that's been killing it in NIL or something, like, if you ask them for help, just like any friend would, I mean, you just be there to help them out. So, yeah, it was really cool to get to work with Aaliyah and get to help her make some videos and watch her really thrive because, you know, it's what she deserves. She was an amazing athlete. So, I mean, yeah, I think there's good quality people here and good quality athletes. So I think, you know, you ask for help from a friend and they'll be there.
Let's see. Let's go here in the middle. That's okay. Yes, ma'am.
This is a question more for like Taylor and Olivia. You guys were both interns. You work with interns. What, as like someone who's looking to get internships, what are you looking for? Like, what do you want? Like, obviously hard worker, but like, what do you want as someone looking to intern, works alongside, learn from you guys?
I'm going to let Taylor go first because I was her intern.
So I need an Olivia. I legitimately shed tears the day she left because I was then by myself for a while. I think for me, and I really think anybody in the athletic department would say this, as we do have a lot of student internships available, you want someone who's committed. Athletics can be very exciting. There's a lot of things happening. And of course, we want people who are passionate about being in sports and whatever university you're at. But you also have to keep the goal. And it's about getting the experience in that role and not so much being on the field on a game day, if that makes sense. And so be excited and definitely pursue opportunities, but make sure you're truly passionate about the work itself. There's a ton of flashy things that come with NIL. I will not deny that. But there are a lot of really hard days. For example, in this space, I don't ever want anyone to be like misconstrued or think that it's always going to be beautiful and glitz and glam, because it's not. So be willing to put in the work. Someone who's willing to, you know, Olivia did a ton of her own research on NIL in the beginning because we were all still learning. So putting forth that effort to where if I'm in a place, you know, and I'm in back-to-back meetings all day, I can come in at the end of the day and my internist said, hey, I knew you haven't had a minute today, but I did this research because I saw this article come out this morning and I saw that, you know, the House versus NCAA, this was happening. And so here's some bullet points for you. Those are the kind of things that I look for, as opposed to, you know, somebody who's just, oh, I just want to be on the field.
Yeah, I think same for me. You know, my job can be glamorous. We work with student athletes all over the country, right? And so one of the biggest events we have every year is the NIL Summit in Atlanta at the College Football Hall of Fame, and everyone wants to intern for that, right? But I get very few interns that actually want to be around and be proactive the rest of the year outside of that event. And so my biggest advice to anyone is be proactive, be present, and be prepared. Because the more prepared you are, and this starts from day one, when you hit the send button on the email, you say, hey, I read X, Y, and Z. Here's what I know about you. I'd love to meet with you and have 15 minutes of your time. Like even something as small as that, as opposed to sending an email saying, hey, I'm a student, here's my resume, here's what I want. It makes a difference and it lets them know that you're paying attention. And so again, to Taylor's point, being proactive and present and really diving deep and saying, how can I be my best advocate, but how can I help everyone around me to succeed? Because that's really your support role when you're an intern. And so your job is to support the people with the full-time jobs and get to the things that maybe they don't have the time to get to because they're in meetings all day long.
We have time for one more question, and then we're going to get some final thoughts from the panelists as well. I know, sir, you've had your hand up for a while, so can we get him the microphone, please? Thank you very much.
So this is a question for Trace. You kind of talked about transferring from Colorado State, and there was a big story this summer coming from Colorado State where the quarterback and the wide receiver were offered, hundreds of thousands of dollars to kind of leave the university, but they stayed put to stay loyal to the program. And there was a lot of people online saying, "Oh, you should have gotten the bag," and kind of chased it. I wanted to see, since you were kind of in their shoes, sort of, like, what is your perspective on that situation and kind of approaching a lose-lose situation where if you get the money, people are going to be like, "Oh, you're greedy and going for the money." But if you stay, they're like, "Oh, why did you not get the money?"
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, Tori, those guys in the video, those are my good friends, and I mean, Colorado State was an amazing place, and I loved it. For me, like, coming to LSU, like, it had nothing to do with the money, believe it or not. It was really just, for me, it was kind of a God thing. And I just, I loved my coaches. I loved the mountains. It was beautiful. I loved everything about it. I felt very supported by the community. But for some reason, I just felt like God was tugging at my heart, like it was time to go. It was time to, move on and continue growing. And so it definitely took a leap of faith. I didn't really know where I was going to end up. It was down to a couple of different schools, and I think I was talking like Clemson, Texas, like a couple of different places. And I remember like praying, like, all right, God, just like make it real clear where you want me and just close the doors that you don't want me to be at. And like the next week, literally after I prayed that prayer, like doors started closing, and I was like, oh shoot, like where am I going to end up now? Like a lot of doors are closed. And, if God wanted to take away basketball from my last year or two of college, then, so be it. And I was willing to do that. But, he opened the LSU door last minute. And I just think he made my decision really clear. So it really didn't have anything to do with the money. But he just wanted me here for a reason. And so here I am. But working alongside everybody here, and Taylor's been amazing, and being able to capitalize off of the content that I already love doing and was already a big passion of mine. I know I'm extremely grateful and happy that I ended up where I did.
Thank you, Trace. We are extremely grateful for all of our panelists. I'd like to give them just a chance to give us a final thoughts on this great conversation, NIL, and maybe some hopes moving forward. David?
Yeah, I think, again, just look at it as an opportunity. I mean, NIL is nothing. It's nothing new. It's new. It's got a new environment. But see it as an opportunity. See it as a way to tell stories and to continue to focus on the brands and the story of athletes, the story of businesses, and how those may align with athletes. And I think in general, just as you move forward, start looking at uncertainty as an opportunity, and for you to jump in there and to be proactive, to help someone, to reach out to Taylor or to Olivia to say, is there any way I can help you with this? The worst thing that they can do is say, no, I'm full. But they might say, yes, I needed you yesterday. Okay, so take risk. Don't be scared by just because a path hasn't been laid doesn't mean you can't start laying that path. Okay, and it can be challenging, but it can be really rewarding to do. So I think there's so much more positive of NIL than there is of negative, and try to find the positive in all of the stories as opposed to the negative.
Thank you, David. Taylor?
Scott, our athletic director, he always says you can find opportunity in chaos. And I think that no better statement can be said for this era. I think everyone in the industry thought I was crazy when I said I was going to take over NIL and coming out of compliance where things are structured and all the things. But there's opportunity in this chaos, and that's applicable for a business who's looking to work with an athlete. That's applicable for an athlete who's looking to build a brand and go out and pursue NIL, and that's applicable for anyone who wants to work in the industry. It's chaotic. I will not tell you otherwise. That is one of the first things, in fact, that I say to anyone who comes and meets with me, is that you have to be able and willing to pivot. You have to be able to turn on a dime, because there have quite literally been days where I rewrote an entire state law and then was told, nope, we're trashing it. And we're going another direction. So you just have to be adaptable, but don't be afraid to look for the opportunity in chaos, and don't be afraid of it, because again, it's chaotic, but you're going to find opportunity.
Well said. Thank you, Taylor. Dr. Karam?
When I first heard that NIL was officially whatever it was, is that athletes could, legitimately get rewarded for that, somebody said, watch what happens with the minor sports and women's sports, because they're the ones who are going to benefit the most. And this person is usually almost always right, and they were right. Even though at football and basketball, it is the glamour. That's the big ticket. It is the female sports that have just risen to the top, and it is the minor sports that are now viewed as major entities. And I think that person was exactly right. And I think that's a wonderful, healthy part of what this whole idea is about.
Absolutely. Thank you. Olivia?
Similar to my other three colleagues, I think this is the largest redistribution of wealth that we have ever seen in college athletics. And if you think about how much the coaches and the universities have profited for decades off of these student athletes, and you look at the opportunity that they have, there's no reason that this shouldn't have happened. There's no reason that this is ruining college athletics. It's simply a transition period, and it will even out. It will get less scary and less chaotic, but any kind of change is going to be uncomfortable for people. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Olivia. And Trace, would you like to wrap us up, sir?
I think all y'all really summed up everything very well. But no, I mean, I'll just say NIL's been a journey and a process, and definitely a learning curve for everybody involved. But I mean, we're kind of the trailblazers in a way. There wasn't really a blueprint for how to navigate this before, I was in college. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's been great. But
And the evolution continues, y'all. It's going to be fascinating to see how the next few years play out. What a great panel discussion we had. Let's give it up for our great panelists. That's going to wrap up this panel. If our guests, feel free to stick around, take a few photos, meet and greet a little bit, or if you have to run, thank you again for your time. Our next panel is coming up at 1 o'clock, so if y'all have time, stay with us. Thank y'all. Go Tigers, go Manship.
hopefully,
You have to be.
yeah.